Hello everyone and welcome to HBR Live. I'm Maureen Hoke, a senior editor here at HBR. We're going to be talking business models today. We're joined by Barry Liebert. He is the CEO of AIMatters. He's also a senior fellow at Wharton Business School and one of the authors of this book, The Network Imperative. Barry's going to be walking us through 10 rules for a successful business model, a really important issue in today's business landscape. As we get started, I just want to remind you to please put your questions and comments into the comments field. Barry will be answering your questions. And please tell us where you're watching us from. We always like to hear that from you. So with that, Barry, please take it away.
Hi, I'm Barry Liebert. Glad to be here this afternoon at Harvard Business Press. I'm the co-author of the book, The Network Imperative. And the book's about today's business models, and we're going to be talking about them today. In fact, what we're going to do something really interesting is I'm going to be asking all of you to provide me with either your company or a company you want me to redesign as a network and a platform company. So before we get started, start sending in your thoughts. Let me know what company you want me to redesign and how I'm going to build shareholder, customer, and employee value for that company. Okay, let's get started. We wrote the book for four reasons. The first reason was why. And the reason was networks produce more value. Let me give you the numbers. Networks today are 4 times more valuable than companies that make things, companies that sell and offer services, companies that create technologies, and obviously companies that have platforms and networks. And why this is so important is that you're seeing what we would call as business model wars everywhere. Think about it for a second. GM may be the largest manufacturer of vehicles, along with Toyota, and Hertz may be the largest renter of vehicles. But none of those companies have the same market valuation as Uber. And there's a good reason why. Uber has no vehicles, but has the largest rider and driver population. Let's try another company. Starwood and Marriott, all these great names in the hotel industry, fantastic brands, fantastic businesses, but none of them compare in value to Airbnb, which is allowing any one of us to act as a hotelier and to offer our houses and our hotel rooms, which is our bedrooms and our living rooms, to others who want to share with them. Think about that for the movie industry. Regal Cinemas versus Netflix. No comparison in value. How about the biggest retailer? Well, it's not Walmart anymore. It's Amazon and Alibaba. And all of those platforms versus the traditional companies are fundamentally outpacing the ability for existing legacy organizations to change. So the reason we wrote the book, the why of the book, is it is more valuable to live in the sharing economy than the renting or owning economy. And I'm using ownership of assets, renting of assets versus sharing of assets. That's the why. Today we're going to focus on the what, the 10 rules to reinvent, reimagine your business model. And with Maureen, we're going to talk about how that's different than traditional corporate strategy I was taught by Michael Porter 30 years ago. What business models are as opposed to corporate strategy. The third thing we're not going to talk about today, but you can find online through Harvard Business Review and Harvard Business Press, is the 5 steps to pivot your business model. It's in the book, but it's also an e-single that you can get on harvardbusinessreview.org next week, June 28th, on its pub date. And finally, we are going to talk about the who, and the who is you. So going back to my opening, I'm going to ask you shortly for a case study. Your company or another company you want me to redesign. Now here's the problem. I'm going to be doing this, as you all know, Facebook Live. No guarantees it's going to be a good case study. No guarantees I'm going to do it well. But with your help, I guarantee we're going to have a good time doing it. Okay, let's talk about the 10 rules. If you don't mind giving me a cue there for a second. The 10 rules are very simple in designing your business model. The first rule is technology, and I'm going to spend a minute on each of these rules. Technology is moving from physical to digital. So as you can see, and probably all of you are sitting in a technology, and the environment, because I'm an ex-real estate guy, is real estate is a technology. It has lights, it has plugs, it has walls, it has windows, has sheetrock. That's technology. It's just thousands of years old. It's just not today's technology, but real estate and plumbing and electrical is a technology. So the first rule is to help your company pivot from physical technologies to digital technologies. Rule number one. And all these rules, you'll notice, are behind me for your reference. They're also on screen. And let's take an example. All of us, many of us online today, have been part of a generation, we grew up, in which we used to receive everything from, phone books to yellow books to our college classmate books of who we went to school with. Well, Facebook came along at this institution, great institution, Harvard, and realized there was a business by connecting us digitally, not just physically. Because my son who went to Harvard, my oldest son, said to me, "Dad, there's a lot of value at Harvard from 9 to 5, a lot of value. But there's even more value at Harvard from 5 o'clock at night to 9 o'clock in the morning." And Mark Zuckerberg knew that 5 to 9 was where the real action took place, not 9 to 5 in the classrooms. That's the Facebook story. And every one of us can think about that. We all have that experience in our lives, 9 to 5 versus 5 to 9. The second one is assets. Now, every one of us think we know what an asset is. I'm sitting in a chair, that's an asset. As I said, I'm sitting in a building, that's an asset. They're really important assets. But in today's world, let me give you the numbers, 80% of all assets are non-assets. They're called intangibles. And intangibles now constitute 80%, where they only constituted 20% only in 1975. Huge shift that you and I, what we know, what we do, are worth more than what we own and what we have. Huge shift. And a good example of that is, think about GM. Another great example, it's on the board for you to see. GM has made a massive shift, rather I should say IBM, from thinking about their assets being building computers to building and hosting software and big data in the cloud. Massive shift for IBM. They went from hardware to services to software to the cloud. And I don't mean the cloud on a weather forecast. It's not raining up there today. It really is in the cloud, which is a different type of discussion for another day. The third rule is strategy. We're going to talk more about this between Maureen and myself in a minute. But the way strategy was taught to me when I went to business school was strategy was about what products, in which markets, with what price point, and what promotion, all these different P's. Well, that's not what business models are about. Because what our research shows is that regardless of your corporate strategy, you can't outperform a business model. Now, what do I mean by that? Camera. Are we still on? Yes, we're still on, but this is what you get with Facebook Live. It's a blast. So real time live, as Maureen says, breaking down the third walls. Here we are today, real time. We took a picture rather than a video. And so what does that mean? It's about changing your business model and allocating your capital differently. And GM is making a huge shift here. GM that makes cars, we're going to talk about them in the future, GM that makes cars, let me give you the number, 600 million of them in the last 100 years, has decided that the ride sharing, that to be in the business of riders and drivers is more valuable than being in the business of just selling cars. So they put up $500 million to be in Lyft. Massive decision. Because they realize the future is not about selling more cars, but letting us drive the cars we already own or sharing the cars we already have. The fourth rule is leadership. Some great stories about leadership. Stan McChrystal is one of my favorites. Stan McChrystal was the general of our Afghan forces. And what he realized is that America was losing the war in Afghan. Not because we aren't well armed, but because the Afghans work in small virtual teams. And he came back to the United States and said, small virtual teams win not just in Afghan, and I said virtual teams, not people under your command and control. Virtual teams are the way to win, not just in war, but in business and in life. My family is a virtual team. My boys live on the West Coast. My wife and I live together. But if you think about my team of 4, none of us are ever together. We all communicate by our technologies. The fifth rule is customers, and it's co-creation. Many of us have children, or at least were children, along the way, at least I think I was, and we use things like Legos. And as much as my boys like Legos, so did my wife and I. My wife's an engineer by training, and so she loved building things. Legos has 120 designers, but 120,000 volunteers. So they have created a complete virtual co-creative customer set, just the way Apple did with its developer community of 500,000, a million developers. Apple, like Lego, let their customers create the products of the future. And in the Apple case, they pay you 70% of the revenues generated for developing the products that Apple sells. How cool is that? And that allows Apple to create billions of dollars of revenues a year. Employees. Well, I don't know about you. I know about my family. No one likes to be the boss anymore. Everybody wants to boss everybody else, so everybody's arguing about what that position really looks like. And so we go back to the childhood of my family, and they said when they were 4, my 2 boys, 4 and 6 respectively, Dad, you're not the boss over me. And I was thinking to myself, now how can that be? I'm in my 30s, they're 4 and 6. Now I'm not the boss over them, who are they? And their answer is, we're the boss of ourselves, as they're texting each other at the dining room table, sitting across from each other, thinking, wow, the rules have changed since I grew up a bit. Employees are not employees anymore. 30% of today's workforce are freelancers. So today, you need to be thinking about how can you think of your customers and your suppliers and your contractors as members of your HR team. Now, I know this is crazy for HR executives that are watching today to think, oh my God, I have all these people that I can garner information from, and they don't work for me. And that's right, they don't work for you. They're like my boys. You are not the boss over them anymore. They are freelancers. They're participants in your world, and you have to think about how your company, here's the soundbite that matters, how you're going to be loyal to them. Now, I know that everything's taught about customer loyalty, but you know that doesn't work. I mean, if I said to my wife, hey, honey, Ellen, that's her name, sorry, Ellen, I want you to be loyal to me. She says, Barry, I'm out of here. It doesn't work. There's no such thing as wife loyalty. What the reality is, if you want your wife or your children to love you, you have to love them. And so companies need to get to the place where in a freelance society, it's about company loyalty, not customer centricity. That's suggesting that a customer has no choice. Companies have to be loyal to their customers. Next, measurement. All of us know what the financial measures are, what the revenues are, what the expenses are, what it costs us, how much is R&D, yada, 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 yada. Gag me. Not that interesting, because what the research says is that accounting is less and less irrelevant. In fact, as I said, 80% of all sources of value are called intangibles. And I gotta tell you, Maureen does not look intangible to me. She looks like she's sitting here right next to me. So does the rest of the team here today. They're here, they're present, they have ideas. They're not intangibles. Even the word demeans us. So measurements about today is sentiment, engagement, big data. And the example of that is Dickies. The husband and wife created Dickies, 500 restaurants strong, and they created something called Smokestack, where they measure in real time everything from the basting to the roasting to the cooking to the customer engagement to the employee engagement. Everything comes back in real time, and they adjust in the day, not unlike what we're doing here today. Finally, next two is governance and mindset. So governance is an interesting issue. As you may all know, 92% of boards are white old guys like me. I don't know what they think we know, but arguably we need a new way to think about the world because we're not the most current on technology. Maybe some of you are, maybe some of you are not. So we need to have a new governance model, a shared governance model, a model where customers are as empowered as employees to sit on boards and to inform the boards about what the future looks like today. And the example of that is Kashi. Kashi was bought by Kellogg's. It was a Whole Foods sort of style. I don't mean the retailer. Whole grains. Their mission was whole grains on a mission. Well, Kellogg's bought them and changed their entire product lineup to be less than gluten-free, less than whole grains. And before you knew it, Kashi disappeared as a brand. And as the CEO of Kellogg says, sometimes big brands can intervene a bit too much. I would say way too much. Last is mindset. Recently in Harvard Business Review, there's been an amazing set of articles about mindfulness. Now, what is mindfulness? It's simply the concept of being present to your reality. And companies are not present to their reality. If they're still thinking that networks are not their core asset, or they think their things or their money are their core asset, then they're not mindful of their reality or of the present. And without mindfulness, what the research says is you suffer. So you see lots of companies failing at an accelerating rate. The way to be mindful is to practice things like meditation that Harvard Business Review is suggesting, is to be present in the moment, to see leadership the way it is, and to suggest the following. The future of mindset and openness is fellowship. So repeat that. The future of leadership is fellowship. That means in a network world, if I want you to be a member of my network, I follow you. Can you imagine Mark Zuckerberg says, all 1.6 billion of you people do what I want you to do? No one would pay any attention. They're only paying attention to their friends and families. So the future of leadership is fellowship. As thoughtful or lack thereof, in your opinion, it is the way the world is going. The better the follower of the leader, the more followers they will have. Now here's where the fun part begins. As I said at the beginning, I'm looking for a case study. It could be your company. It could be any other company you want me to talk about. And it may or may not work. So, Maureen, do you have any ideas?
We have gotten some good ideas.
Great. Go for it.
Call a few of them out.
Great.
We got a couple of votes for GE.
GE, fantastic.
We've had home hardware store like Home Depot.
Great.
We've had the aviation industry. And someone also says Hewlett Packard has gone through a huge restructuring, but how would you still redesign it? So GE, Home Depot, HP, or aviation industry?
Fantastic. Wow. Okay, let me see if I can do this in real time following the rules behind me so you can all see the rules. And if I can have the rules up behind me again from there so I can participate. So the first thing we're going to talk about is I'm going to try GE for a second. We'll start there and then we'll go to Home Depot. If you think about it for a second, GE has been magnificent at building an industrial engineering company. And luckily, I'm going to re-engineer this with Jeff Immelt, the current CEO. Even he knows that he has to become what's called a platform company. Let me separate for a second and differentiate platform from network. Platform is the digital device that I carry my loved ones on, my knowledge, my healthcare, my relationships, my Facebook streams, my Twitter, my Instagram. I mean, I have everybody here. This is my entire, I always say my heart and soul, and I carry it next to me, right? This is an appendage of mine. And so if GE really wanted to become a platform and a network business, GE would think, okay, how am I going to do something similar? And I'm making this up, GE. How am I going to do something like Apple has announced, which is Apple Home? So I have recently installed Apple HomeKit in my house, and I found it to be interesting. All the devices that I installed, which is thermostats and fire and smoke detectors and my refrigerator, all work on Apple Home. But here's the issue. Because Apple Home doesn't really have a platform yet for me to control all those devices, it'd be like me streaming music, not using Apple Music or Spotify, with a variety of different apps. So if GE really wanted to do this the way Apple Home is beginning to move, and Apple Home has announced that in their iOS 10 release in September, the whole platform will be integrated. GE would say, okay, hold on a minute here. I do everything from locomotives to jet planes, you name it, to finance, to appliances. I am going to create a Spotify, if you might think of this, or Tinder, if I can do that. Swipe left, swipe right to enable me to control the device that I want to control. That would be the first step, to create a platform for GE, which was universal. And then I would make every device I built an Internet of Thing, so that that thing would work on the platform. And then finally, and the coup d'etat, is that GE has served tens of millions of people. And how do I know? Because we used to run their social media for them. And they would connect every member of their network to the platform, so that the platform would host the exchanges between the network members and each other, which means GE would receive its future products and services and pay its customers 70%, like Apple does, to provide those future product releases. Not bad? Okay?
Great. Yeah. So we do have a couple of questions.
Go for it.
If I can just jump in.
Go for it.
So one of them is someone asked, where does supply chain fit into your business model matrix?
Fantastic. Do you want to come sit next to me
I'm
here, Maureen?
going to pull up a chair.
Come pull up a chair. So Maureen's asked a fantastic question, which is where does supply chains fit into our network? And obviously, I would say to you that what's critically important is that in today's world, most businesses, let me give you the numbers, 98% of businesses think about their supply chains as being one side of their business model. And what I've just said, and one of the rules, customer co-creation, is that there's something called the customer chain now. And the customers are acting as suppliers. In the beginning, what you need to do on the platform is put up all of your suppliers, let all of your suppliers participate with you as a member of your network, but only as a way to get your customers to become part of the customer supply chain.
Right. Another question that came in is fresh off the headlines. What do you think about Microsoft's purchase of LinkedIn, and how do you think that's going to redesign their business model?
I love that question. I used to work as an advisor to Steve Ballmer and some of his senior leaders years ago, and I used to say to them, listen, tools are not sufficient, that the network is part of the value of Microsoft. Now, Microsoft, you may not all know, Microsoft has more than, I think the number is 2.2 billion users, much bigger than than Facebook's network. But the difference is Microsoft has never connected me to anybody else. I can't even design my own software, talk about my software. It's all just a download and listen. Like I'm a one-sided machine that I receive their software. The cool thing that the new CEO of Microsoft realized is, hold on a minute here, I can combine tools, which is software, with the network. And imagine the flywheel approach. And what's going to happen now is the more members of the network, 400 million, the more I release of my 2.2 billion users, the more insights I receive, the more tool insights I receive, the more tool uploads I receive. I think it's a spectacular move by Microsoft to redesign their business. We'll see if they can execute.
Well, something you talk about a lot is the role of leadership in all of this, right? But whenever there's a big acquisition like Microsoft and LinkedIn, I always have to think about the people, the followers, who have to follow those leaders, and the resistors. Are there any strategies you've seen when you're in that leadership position and you're trying to redesign a business model for getting resistors on board? How do leaders do that effectively?
So what I find from most leaders is what they really say to everybody else is, Maureen, get on board. What they really mean to say is, I'm not on board, I just made an acquisition, I'm not going to change, I'm just buying my change, and you have to do all the change. So for most leaders, I find if you really want change in an organization, Mahatma Gandhi said this, you have to basically be the change you want to see in others. Followers, especially resistors, will not follow changes in business models unless they see the leader acting as literally the front person in that lead effort. And most leaders don't like to be out front because they're not comfortable with change. They really want to keep doing the same thing they've done and acquire the change they want to be.
Well, I do want to shift gears just for one moment, because as I was preparing for this conversation today, I went back and reread something one of our editors wrote a year ago called What is a Business Model? We'll put a link into the comments for you. And it's sort of a walk back through. It's a wonderful walk back through business model strategy, especially as it pertains to academic research. And one of the questions that came up for me is, how do we understand the difference between business model and competitive strategy? How should we be thinking about those things, especially for companies that are trying to digitally transform themselves?
I am going to hope that you do put that link up, yes, because what it said in that link was companies can't even identify their business model.
Right.
So therefore, they don't even know how to change their business model. So let me just start with how we tell leaders to do that. We found when we did our research of 1,500 S&P companies that there's only 4 business models. People who make things, own things, and sell things, and it's regardless of industry. People who serve things, which is consulting firms, healthcare firms, things like financial services, service firms, labor-based firms. People create intellectual property, which is tech firms, high tech, biotech, clean tech, all the tech, big data tech firms, and then the network orchestrators. So once your firm can decide which of these business models are we, how are we really creating value, which is business models are determined by one and only one thing, how you spend and make money. Not what industry you're in, but how you spend and make money. That is differentiated from strategy is, which products do I want to sell to which customers in which markets? Business models is a new science. Strategy is fairly new. It's 30, 40 years old, 50 years old. Bruce Henderson at BCG, right? Michael Porter 30 years ago. Business models is a brand new science.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about your book is you really wrote the book for traditional firms and less of the digital natives that sort of are already out ahead in terms of thinking about how a business model should change.
Correct.
And yeah, I was just wondering if there's one thing that you could say to a leader to like do Monday morning to start thinking about their business model differently. What would you recommend?
Okay, so the one thing I want to recommend to every business model leader, which means every one of us, is to ask the following question if you want to join the business model elite, is where are the excess assets in the world? And I'm using assets to be both tangible and intangible. Think of it this way. Whereas GM might orchestrate a business model that says, I'm going to compete against Ford or Toyota by building a better feature, a better function in different markets, and I'm going to offer an electric car like Tesla. That's interesting, but that's not a new business model. That's just new technology. If you ask a different question, where are the excess assets? Where are the excess cars sitting? Well, the answer is everywhere, right? All of our cars are sitting in this big parking lot across the way. And how can we do what Zipcar did and Uber did, which is say, how do we take advantage of all those excess assets, those excess cars, and make them available around the world? That's the first thing today's leaders ask. Where are the excess assets, and how do I tap into them?
So we are getting some more questions, and thank you for submitting them. Someone's asking if you could talk a little bit more about the role of corporate culture in a successful business model and how that permeates how you think about this.
So there's an old expression by Carl Jung, which is a psychiatrist, behavioral psychiatrist, who basically said that which is intangible is most enduring. Which is a funny thing because we all think just the opposite. That which is tangible, this wall behind me, this chair is the most enduring, but you just told me. Culture is the most enduring. You can't change it overnight. It's really hard to modify. People like doing the same thing they're used to doing. It's impossible to move. So the best you can do is to think about right now, how are we going to leverage, attach to the most important thing people have, which is their heart. Everything I just said to you, everything you knew. That what's important to every one of you is that you care about somebody else. That you have things that you want to share. It's true for all of us. That it could be our words, it could be our friends, it could be our pictures, it could be our cars, right? It could be our houses. We all have things that we'd like to get value out of. And so the question as a leader is, can you ask yourself seriously, if I want this organization to change, can I be so mindful as to ask them what matters to them, which is hard for leaders to do, and to follow what they really mean without punitive charges. And remember, there's a really good rule. All leaders have a simple rule. All good deeds go fully punished. And I'm suggesting we eliminate that rule.
So we've had another great question come in, and someone's asking if you have any advice for a small business owner, maybe someone who's just starting out. How do you create those network effects? Like, how do you create the customer system that you need to create value in a different way? Any advice for them?
I absolutely love that question. So I'm here with our social media expert, Kaylin Darcy, and her family owns a small business town called Darcy Naturals. And they already have 1,400 people that follow them and that are active members and customers of their business. Now, any business, including Darcy Naturals, has the ability to basically connect all those customers. That's a small business, right? Family-run business. Small business that can ultimately connect each of their customers to each other. My family, my mother's father, started a business in New York City called a car dealership called Chevrolet. They could have connected, and they still can connect every customer that comes into that dealership and let those customers create affinity with each other, family-run business, and to the dealership itself.
Well, I think we have time for just a couple more questions. And one thing I really want to ask you about, which is so important in how we think about business today, is everyone's trying to be more digital. And you write about digital transformations a lot. But there's a risk of digital transformation being window dressing sometimes on a company. Just by rewriting your business model, sometimes that's not enough. How can leaders sort of avoid not doing enough or not going far enough when they think about how to lead a digital transformation?
So I think that's a really good question. What we found is most people can't reinvent their business model. Right? It's just really hard to say, where am I going to look for excess assets in the world? And remember, I'm using that broadly, meaning friends, family, cars, houses. Where am I going to look for excess assets and begin to reinvent my business model around a sharing construct or an intellectual property content? Digital suffers the same fate, right? Every one of my lower organizations want to just put digital lipstick on their organization. They want to have social media. Right? Well, social media doesn't change the economics of your business. It doesn't even change the way you design your products or services. To be a mobile-first, data-driven organization with machine learning, which I don't know we'll cover today, with machine learning, which is how to use technology to understand what's happening in real time, if you make that the center of what you do, everything else follows.
That's terrific. I think that's all the time we have today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all your questions and all your comments. And thank you, Barry. This has been a terrific conversation. We hope you'll join us for our next HBR Live. Please visit hbr.org where you can find more from Barry and his co-authors. We'll put links to some of the articles they've also written in the comments. And please come back and visit us next time.
And enjoy the book, The Network Imperative.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.